Hi everyone, I'm Reiss, and I'm more than happy to introduce you today to CanLit AuthorFest. Today we'll be speaking about Canadian literature and its very importance for the cultural scene in Canada and in the world. I will be followed by a lineup of speakers, including publisher ALLAN BRIESMASTER, writer and satirist Jeff COTTRILL, producer and TAIT, and host and founder of All About Canadian Books, FLETCHER. And then of course we'll hear from Alex Chan, who is the owner behind this beautiful. We're coming out of the pandemic. It is now July 2022, and the Canadian literature scene and literature scenes all across the world and artists have been the most heavily impacted. We depend on live performances, but the problem goes a bit deeper than that, because in the arts you often don't get paid for what you do. And so what really stood out to me and many people within the art community was how strong a nearly starving industry, and I use that term with all its strength, starving industry has not only survived, has actually been thriving throughout this time. Very early in the first couple of months of the pandemic, everyone shifted to the online medium with Zoom. For those who are not in Canadian literature or literature in general, I think it's important to note that the people running these events are often not getting any funding or not getting paid. And the authors in the events being featured or attending the open mics are purely self-promoting themselves in the hope of selling a book if they are a published author, or fine-tuning their presentation skills as an up-and-coming. And authors have a lot to say. Well, also what's interesting about the Canadian arts is that around the world, in English-speaking countries, to note that, especially in Australia and New Zealand, authors, Canadian authors, are well known. They even have special courses at university on CanLit. But here in Canada, and this does bleed into the other arts, including music most particularly, and it can into dance as well, and certainly theatre and acting, is that Canada is a really good breeding ground for the artists, but it's almost as if in Canada we don't pay attention to our artists unless another country tells us that we should be paying attention to them. And I have to say that if there's any industry in this country worth paying attention to, it's Canada, and most particularly our Canadian presses. Now, many of you are familiar with the Big Four: HarperCollins, Penguin Random House, Simon & Schuster, for example. However, there's a number of independent Canadian presses. Speaking for Ontario alone, back a few years ago, the number was 36. These presses are award-winning. Many of them are included on a university curriculi, and these are trade presses. I want to be clear, these are not self-published authors. The only difference is these independent presses rely on government, well, both in fact, but they rely more on government funding. But they really put the attention into their authors, and they pick their authors based on their artistic merit. And often, a lot of these presses are willing to be a bit more racy, or willing to address topics that maybe the mainstream or the Big Four don't want to address. But more importantly, with funding dollars falling back from 2010, particularly, the PR dollars have been cut back with the Big Four, and there's no PR dollars within the independent presses. So this event that's coming up on August 6th is unlike anything we've ever seen, because we're going to be addressing many of these issues. As you can see, they're quite layered. However, it's going to be a fun, celebratory event with 22 performing established authors teamed up with emerging, non-performing highlight authors who will have a small performance. It will be a networking event. We will have keynote speakers talking about and expanding upon these topics and other topics that I have just brought forward. We will also have, by popular demand, a Publishing Perspectives panel. People and authors attending, and this is for up-and-coming writers, this is for book lovers, will be exposed to authors, will meet and greet authors. They will, and people who want to be a writer will find other writing groups to attend. They will also understand the difference between what it means to be independently published, self-published, or to go with a trade press. And that is very important, especially based on the sharp shift that we have had in regard to self-publishing in the last 5 years. So, that being said, I'm more than honored to also invite you here and show you the celebrity flair. And where you will hear about our speakers in a moment and understand how that relates better. But with that celebrity flair, we are showcasing to the public that authors can be influencers. Please come out and support our authors. And now, without further ado, I'm going to invite our first speaker to the stage, ALLAN BRIESMASTER. He was the director of the Art Bar reading series from 1994 to 2002, which is Canada's longest-running weekly reading series. After being at that, he was the main editor of Seraphim Editions from 2000 to 2008, and then he co-founded COTTRILL Books in 2006, continuing as chief poetry editor until 2017. His specialty pressed ALLAN's House has produced 60 trade quality books that are limited editions since 2003. And that is actually more titles than most larger presses produce. Some of the books that ALLAN has edited have won or been shortlisted for major awards. He is the author of 9 books of poetry himself, and he was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Membership in the League of Canadian Poets in 2017. Everyone, please welcome ALLAN BRIESMASTER.
Thank you. I want to share some reflections on the potential significance of the event that will take place here a month from now. This will be from the perspective of someone who's been active on the Toronto literary scene, particularly with poetry, for several decades as a literary readings organizer, editor, and publisher. Beyond that, I am someone who continues trying to build community through poetry and other language arts. During these COVID years, many of us experienced the loss of seeing and hearing live performances in the same space, both viscerally and consciously, music, theater, dance, and of course, literary readings. There was an upside to this time of confinement when events shifted to Zoom and other online facilities, enabling us to connect on our screens with audiences across the continent and beyond. But nothing else compares to the pleasure of hearing the spoken word while feeling the close presence of other listeners in the same space. That energy running through the audience, the applause enveloping us, the conversations between the poetry sets, handshakes and hugs, and discussion and catching up afterward. When I think about this further, I can separate out the extroverted aspects of my encounters with the spoken word. At the heart of it, I realized I was seeking to connect with the voices of the authors. Even more than that, to connect with the work itself. We often speak of a writer having a unique style or voice that reaches the inner ear even when we read the text silently on the page. Such deeper hearing does not always come easily, especially with writing styles that are unfamiliar. One of the greatest benefits of live readings is the inroads they offer toward hearing and thus feeling and understanding the voice behind the work more fully afterward when we encounter the texts themselves. This is not to say that a growing number of writers are not producing videos and other multimedia work. They are, both online and in performance, bearing a distinctive artistic merit and importance of its own. This enriches our culture, especially when it supplements and extends the more traditional art forms, which AuthorFest will primarily be showcasing. Literary readings in Toronto typically have only some 30 to 50 people in attendance for about 2 hours. Before COVID, there were a minimum of 3 or 4 of these a week, plus the occasional festival that would have larger audiences for well-known writers. There is a real thriving community associated with these readings. AuthorFest is rather ambitiously on a still larger scale and will be a uniquely different creature, yet in the same spirit of community building. Some of the writers that are featured are well known, and some are not as widely known, but deserve to be. I'm hopeful that the audience next month will include a larger than usual proportion of attendees who are book lovers as well as writers and aspiring writers. It will help the audience at large see that authors are people to pay attention to, as much as any celebrity, perhaps offering even more value. Not to mention the book deals. Regarding book sales, it's true that literary events tend to be small in scale and overlooked by the general media, thereby not reaching people who aren't writers themselves, friends of writers, or students. Interestingly, despite this fact, the total volume of sales at readings, particularly for poetry, in most cases tends to exceed the sales in bookstores. The stores are loaded, of course, with commercial books. Readings sell books. It's also true, though, that with poetry, we are only talking about hundreds, not thousands of copies of almost all such books. But consider this, the best of those books will be worth reading and rereading, not just after a day or a year, but for decades. AuthorFest promises to be a one-of-a-kind event that can widen the reach of this combination of an unmediated experience of the spoken word, its unique acoustic capability to move the heart, stir the imagination, make us think, and the opportunity to take the text home with you, with the author's signature on it. Having had such an experience and carrying the voice you heard home as you read the book itself is something no one can ever put a price tag on.
Please welcome Jeff COTTRILL with his newest book, Hate Story.
So, is satire dead? I wouldn't say so. Satire is still very much alive in late-night TV comedy, and we see it all the time in editorial cartoons. As long as politics is in a bad place, we will always have comedians and artists to mock it. But what I'm really asking is literary satire dead? A few decades ago, we had something of a golden age of literary satire. We had writers like Kurt Vonnegut and books like Catch-22 and The Clockwork Orange, The Magic Christian, and The World According to Garp. And there were others that were willing and eager to take the mickey out of social and political hypocrisy. But these days, I keep hearing that satire doesn't sell. Agents and publishers seem reluctant to take on novels with characters who aren't likable enough and storylines that aren't realistic enough. And that's not just my experience. I've seen other writers griping about this on Twitter and elsewhere. But I think an even bigger issue is that we live in an extremely censorious age. People don't say what they really think out of fear of the activists on social media naming and shaming them, even getting them fired from their jobs. And we've seen this happen in the literary field. When a terrific epic like American Dirt becomes so controversial because of its supposed cultural appropriation, or when young adult writers like Kosako Jackson and Bethany Morrow have their books cancelled for questionable reasons, that's when you know we are giving too much power to the mob. What chance does satire have to thrive in such an environment? The whole point of satire is to say what we are not allowed to say. The whole purpose of satire is to tip over the sacred cows. And that's why it's a perfect tool for social commentary. As somebody once said, probably Bernard Shaw, if you want to tell the truth, make them laugh or they'll kill you. Satire works like a sugar-coated pill. It gives you the bad news in the more accessible, digestible form of ridicule and irony. The best satire exaggerates the literal truth in order to tell a higher truth. I don't know if literary satire is dead or not, but I'm trying to keep it breathing with my debut novel, Hate Story, which is right there. It looks like that. And it's one of many books being spotlighted at CanLitAuthorFest on August 6th, 2022. And my book is, in fact, a satire of the censorious digital world we've created, among other things. It begins with a riot at a funeral. The funeral of Paul Shoreditch, about whom there's a nasty website that has been sullying his name for years. What did Paul Shoreditch do to make everyone so angry? You're going to have to buy the book to find out. I assure you, it's not a politically correct book. It's not a book that toes the line of acceptable thought that we've drawn for this time. But I was still lucky enough to find a publisher who got it and made it a reality. So I look forward to sharing the stage and the exhibitor lineup with many other wonderful writers next month. Again, my name is Jeff COTTRILL. I guess that's my time. Thank you.
There is such a huge value on a mental, physiological, and biological level that our books, our words are vital to our cultural voice. And if we lose books, I cannot emphasize enough that we as a culture will lose our voice because other people, other entities will be filling in the gaps. And if we lose literacy, we will never get that voice back. For those of you who are familiar with history, with how the churches had their clergies in Latin before the regular people spoke Latin, it was only imparted to the aristocrats, to modern day things such as the Taliban with young boys being recruited. If you don't underscore handwriting, cursive writing being taken out of the schools, if you as an individual cannot actually decipher a text for yourself and make your own decision about what you're being told versus what you can read and see, we walk a very thin line between a possibly very dangerous path. Books can enrich and enlighten us, and they also become some of the best screenplays. Now I'm more than honored to introduce my next speaker. And everybody who is here today will be at CanLitAuthorFest. My next speaker is the internationally renowned producer, TAIT. She's an award-winning film producer, screenwriter, novelist, playwright, and casting director with an international career of over 45 years. Anne cast both the series of Anne of Green Gables and all 7 years of Road to Avonlea. Now, obviously, that was some time ago, and between then, she's kept very busy. However, in 2008, she came out with her movie, Iron Road, and that starred Sam Neill, Peter O'Toole, among many other rising and well-known stars, and addressed the historical element of the CN Rail being built by the Chinese-Canadian immigrants. During the course of making this film, she learned the value of the Chinese-Canadians' contribution to Canada, and in 2016 she wrote the book Li Jun and the Iron Road. Normally, you have a screenplay adapted from a novel, so this was the other way around. That being said, she will be speaking now about the value we have behind books, and also telling you about the initiative that she is moving forward with to stop Asian hate. Everyone, please welcome Ann Tate to the stage.
Thank you, my dear Ivy.
Let me put this lower. There.
Yes, I appreciate that. I think I'm the shortest in the room. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to you today in this glorious space. I want to start with something that our much loved and much admired film director Norman Jewison said. He famously said, "Film is the literature of our century." So, I want to examine that a bit and say, is it? Is it really? And I want to talk about the actual connection between film and literature, if you like, of book writing. My career has been in both, so I feel I can compare it. The fact is that more than 50% of films and 25% of television shows are based on books. And even more important to the film business is that films from books gross 53% more and attract 56% more audience than those that are original screenplays. Now, you talked about monetizing, Alan, but a film producer is impressed by that kind of statistic. And because it's about the bucks, right? They get 56% more audience naturally, because they come with appeal to those that have read the books. But I actually did it backwards. The book that I wrote, called Li Jun and the Iron Road, is based on the movie that I produced and did a lot of story editing on. So I did it backwards, contrary to what Ivy was saying. But I know that really one of the things that attracted Dunder Press to publish it was the fact that it had been shown in cinemas across Canada, that it had been shown 3 times on CBC, and although it was not an original idea, it had a very different point of view. And I'll talk to you about that in a minute. That, I know, was important to the publisher, and why they quickly agreed and wanted to publish. So let's examine what Norman meant by that. Saying that film is the literature of our century. There is a big difference. Books tell their story through words. Movies tell their story through pictures. They really do. Now, there's some voiceover, and of course there's dialogue. But when you think about your memories of movies, isn't it? The images, the pictures, and pictures have great power, but so do words. The difference is often point of view. The novel is offered a first person's point of view, or sometimes, I think in one of the author's books that you will hear on August the 6th, it's 3 points of view. And that works wonderfully in novels, but not in movies most of the time. And that will show the power of books. And I know it. I know its power because so many people that have read this book come up to me and say, I didn't know this story. I didn't know what they did, what they went through to build that railroad. And thank God I know now. So, that's one little example of what a book can do. And I believe that all of our Canadian books can have that power. So, go to your library and get it out. Thank you.
Everyone, please welcome FLETCHER.
Hello. Thank you so much, Ivy, and thank you, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm terrified to be here, but what I would like to do is just do a little bit of an experiment today. First part is very easy. Can you please raise your hand if you love books? Yeah, exactly. Okay. Second part, a little bit of homework for you. I would encourage you to go home and, I don't know, if you're like me, beside your bedside table, there is a stack of books. I have 3 stacks, they're piled high. Look at your stack of books. First question, how many of those books are by Canadian authors? Second thing I'd like you to look at is, how many of those books are by independent press? What I suspect you will find is that the majority of the books in your bookshelves, the bedside table, are from the UK or America. On June 30th, BookNet Canada released some stats on the industry. And they looked at the number of units sold for 2017 to 2021. And of those books across Canada, the top 15 bestsellers, 5 were Canadian authors. So that's 33% of all of the books sold were Canadian authors. There are some regional differences, but I look at that stat and I think, unfortunately, the majority of Canadians aren't reading Canadian. And if anything, during the pandemic, we have learned to be supportive, to buy local. Our local bookstores, the independents, received a lot of love. And I'd love to see in 2022 this love to continue with Canadian authors and also the independent bookstores, publishers, because it's important. We have so many talented Canadian authors. I mean, I look out in this room and I see so many. On August 6th, there will be even more. And that's what it's all about. It's all about Canadian books. And on August 6th, AuthorFest is important because it's going to be showcasing Canadian talent. So I encourage as many people to read Canadian so that all of the books on the bookside table are filled with Canadian authors' works. Yay! Yay, Canada! Thank you. See you August 6th.
So without further ado, let's welcome Alex Chen. shoot this microphone. Maybe this one. Yeah. See if this helps. Maybe it's too close to the amp. Okay. Is that the right one?
Thank you, Ivy, for the introduction. First of all, I must say I'm very delighted to be hosting AuthorFest at the Parkdale Hall. The Parkdale Hall is actually nestled into the historic Parkdale Cinema. The Parkdale Cinema was built by the ALLAN brothers in the year 1920. And they were a pair of famous cinema moguls. They built over 50 theaters across North America, including the Danforth Music Hall as well. So this cinema was operational until 1970, at which point it ceased being a cinema and was actually taken over by the Eaton's family and was an Eaton's department store. It had various other retail uses since then, and it was only until 2020 when COVID struck that the tenants all moved out of here. And for the first time in 100 years, exactly 100 years, the building was vacant. So when I came in here looking for spaces for another project, I actually came up into a closet and saw some of the golden rosettes that you see on the ceiling, and ended up learning more about the history of the venue and decided to take down the drop ceiling, restore it, and then sharing it with the community. So that being said, I'm very happy to host so many talented literary artists in the venue, and looking forward to seeing you all on August 6th. Thank you.
The menu for AuthorFest is absolutely divine. I think I mentioned earlier, and it's all made from scratch. Now let Andrea fill you in, which she took the time to make custom for this event. Please welcome Angela.
Actually all made from scratch because I use like hot sauces, but anyways, disclaimer. Thank you guys all for coming. I'm really excited to be part of this awesome event. I know that Ivy has put a lot of thought and time and energy towards it, and I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be amazing, and it's true what you said. I actually don't really know that many local authors, and I feel like that's kind of a tragedy because we do have so much good talent here in Canada. I'm an artist myself, so I'm all about supporting local artists. So once again, that's a great reason that we should be here. And I'm sorry about the timing of the food delivery. I wish it was like right now or when you guys first got here. But on the menu, we have jerk tacos, and there is a mango salsa, and one is a little spicier than the other. It says spicy, so if you can't handle spicy, don't go for that one. We decided on a Caribbean theme, so everything has that kind of like little twist to it, but I'm very eclectic. I am like an integrative chef, so I like to integrate all sorts of different things, and I'm vegan, but you don't have to be vegan to enjoy the food. Most people actually do the jackfruit, which is similar to pulled pork, but it's very healthy and nutritious. And what else do we have? Oh yeah, we have something that's very not traditionally Caribbean, but we have sushi today with a Caribbean twist. And yeah, there's also some cassava chips for you guys to enjoy. And if anybody wants a hot, fresh taco, I'm all about like quality and fresh, so I don't mind going back there and making you a hot one. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I hope you guys enjoy the food, and thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you for everyone who's helped make this possible. And special thanks to KindredKitchens.ca and also Paula's Try Miracle, and also Caribbean Showtime TV and Richard Aziz. Thank you.